Welcome to the 3A Athletics Workshop Podcast. Deep dives through the journey of youth sports, what parents experience, what coaches experience, and most importantly, what your kids experience. We'll also feature the latest information, tips, tools, and resources to help parents, coaches, and athletes navigate and improve the culture of youth sports. And now, the 3A Athletics Workshop Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to episode number 3 of the 3A Athletics Workshop Podcast. Today, I'm here with my partner and co-founder, Seth Taylor, and we are excited to dive into the lion mindset and the antelope mindset. And for me, mindset is something we learned a lot about in professional sports, not something we learned a lot about in youth sports. And I think a big topic for us is how can we make parents more conscious of what these two mindsets mean and how this applies to the youth sports experience.
Yeah.
So starting with the parents, Seth, what do you think is the shift that we need to see in consciousness in the world of youth sports pertaining to parents specifically?
Yeah. So to build, this kind of builds on our last session when we were talking about conscious, unconscious, right? The idea is the mindset needs to go from being, when we're talking about, just to back up real quick, when we talk about mindset, right, what we're trying to talk about is conscious mindset versus unconscious mindset, right?
Right.
The last session we did was all about how do we work with the unconscious mindset. And if we do that, it creates a shift in the conscious mindset. And what we need is a conscious mindset. Most people, and this is why we're the idea of lions and antelopes, right? Most people function from their unconscious instead of their conscious. In the world of sports, we become excellent, we improve, we train effectively, we get better, we have an impact, we become better teammates, we become better parents, we become better coaches, we perfect our craft. We do all this when we engage it consciously. Even on the field, it's on the field and on the court, it's acting versus reacting, right? Reacting is an unconscious experience for the most part. Acting tends to be a conscious experience, right? Those that act, when we talk about being aggressive, being an attacker, having an attack mindset, being, I've used the term killer, for lack of a better term, like what I'm looking for in my soccer players is I need a killer on the field. Someone who goes out there and doesn't wait, they go at you, right? And that is a conscious mindset. So to train consciously, to train intentionally, to have it here where you're walking on the field, here's what I'm here to work on today, and here's how I'm going to execute that, I'm going to do that. It looks like maturity in a player, but it's actually the work of bringing someone out of the unconscious world and into the conscious world. Does that make sense?
Yep. For parents, at what age should they be looking to help their child to develop that type of mindset?
Right. Yeah, that we want to wait until after the developmental years to do that. Right, because the developmental years is about nurturing the unconscious, right? A child in their developmental years, again, is 0 to about 12, okay? I mean, 10, 11, 12 is where they're starting to make that transition out. By 12, usually they're out of that developmental years and they're into adolescence. Right, in those years, it's 100% about laying down an unconscious foundation that you are safe, you are loved, you are not going to die, there is no risk in this space. So the goal is to create that in those years. And then once they exit those years, adolescence sometimes is called, in the archetype, they call it the warrior phase, where the warrior starts to show up. The actual need shifts from love and safety to, give me something hard, give me a challenge, give me something. And that's what can begin to nurture that, Here's a great example from my own life. It was like 6-7 months ago, my son's playing soccer. I gave him an incentive. I said, hey, bud, he loves Nerf guns. So I said, listen, try juggling. And I showed him, I said, if you can do 20 juggles on your feet, not on your knees, on your feet, 20 juggles without the ball hitting the ground. I go, if you can develop that, I'll take you to the store, I'll buy you any Nerf gun you want. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah. Well, guess how often he's practiced? 0. Why? Because I just gave him this is something you do consciously to receive a conscious award. Mm-hmm. It's not because he's lazy, and it's easy for us to try to project that adult thing onto the kids. Oh, he's just lazy, he just cares about video games, blah, 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 whatever. That's not what it is. It's that developmentally, he's not in that space. He's not in here's your reward, go hunt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's the thing. So in the development, once they've exited those years, and you can see that, you'll see it solidify. Then you can, and then I guarantee you, at 14, if I gave him an incentive like that, he'd have it in a week. Because he's ready for that.
So, touching on the antelope mindset, what is the antelope mindset?
Yeah. Well, I developed this analogy and started giving talks on it a few years ago because I lived in Africa when I was a kid. Right. So when I was a boy, I lived in Kenya for a while, and we would actually go out, even though we were just there doing stuff, we'd go on safari from time to time. And I had the privilege of seeing some big cats chase some antelopes. And there's nothing quite like it, and even when I was a kid, I was allowed to watch nature shows. I couldn't watch like violent stuff, but nature shows are really violent. They're amazingly violent. But I would watch, I remember always being kind of blown away by the antelopes, because if you're watching the chase, the lion is chasing the antelope, and if you just cover up the lion with your hand, it's amazing. You're seeing this incredibly powerful, athletic, amazing thing moving and fast and just beautiful. But its mentality, its state of consciousness is the best way to put it, is complete fight, flight, or freeze. It is moving because it is being chased. It is an unconscious reaction of pure survival. And antelopes live that way all the time. Even when they're just chilling and they're eating the grass, if you watch them close enough, they are in a hypervigilant state, and they are subconsciously aware that they're probably being watched right now. Right. And so the antelope is somebody, when you see them on the field all the time, because honestly, most athletes, the vast majority of athletes are antelopes, and there's not a lot of lions there, but the antelopes are the ones who tend to be reacting, which is easy to observe in a sport like soccer, right? It's less in baseball, right? But it's easy, and but the idea is an antelope only runs because it's being chased, and it only runs when it's being chased, right? That's why you've probably heard of the phenomenon of playing to the level of your competition. A lot of people do that, right? Well, that's an antelope action, right? Well, I'm not being chased, so I don't have to run as fast, right?
Yep.
That's the idea. That kind of defines it well.
So then, shifting to the lion mindset, how would you describe that lion mindset, and how would that look in the world of youth sports?
Right. Yeah. And again, this is where the word youth sports is tricky, right? Because you don't see lions in the developmental years.
Right.
We might think we do, because there's usually there's a Travis Snyder that's killing everybody.
Yeah.
But he's only doing that because he's being driven from the same way everybody else is. A little kid who's scoring 6 goals a game and is super competitive at 8 years old is doing that because deep down inside he's earning love and he's getting that affirmation. He's moving that. And not that you don't have great athletes, you do. You have these kids that are just really, really, really good athletes and they enjoy it. But in that stage of development, it's not normal to develop a conscious attack mindset. It's just not. We do it because there's all this feedback coming, and we do it because that feedback is coming, right? They're told, we put them in this structure, we go say do this, and we give them this super intense feedback, and they start to run, and some are faster than others. And so we get a lot of high performance antelopes, but we don't get lions. Lions get developed in those 12, 13, 14, 15. If they have a strong enough foundation, there is a sense of I am loved, I am safe no matter what. They can consciously emerge. Their conscious self starts to emerge, and they start to desire. Okay, I want that. Well, how are you going to get it? I'm going to go get it. And that's that. I run because I'm hungry. I run because of desire. I run because of that. And you'll notice that with athletes because they tend to be pretty relaxed. You don't see a lot of fear. I'm thinking of guys like Mike Trout. There's not a lot of fear there. And that's why you see lions playing on the plains of Africa when they're sitting with their cubs around stuff. They're not like antelopes where their heads on a swivel all the time. They're just playing and goofy. Why? Because they know they're not being hunted, right? So a lion knows it's not being hunted, but when it's time to hunt, they can turn it on. And that's because the foundation is solid. I'm good. I'm safe. I'm secure. So now I can get hungry. And that happens in those developmental years. You start to see those killers emerge.
How do you think parents can model that behavior for their children? And how can we cultivate and support that, and at what age?
Yeah. Yeah, the way we cultivate, I'll take the second one first. The way we cultivate it is by doing our work so that we can remove all that pressure, all that anxiety, all that stuff we tend to project on our kids, so that that foundation can get laid of safety first. That has to happen first. So if somebody's listening to this and their kid is 6, 7, 8 years old and they're playing soccer, it's about that first. Back up and let that safety develop. And then when they hit those spaces, that's when things like incentives are actually quite helpful. Kids can nurture that in their kids as long as they recognize that they're still in a place of, as a parent, your job is still, no matter what, even when they're in those years, your job isn't to all of a sudden flip and become a coach. is to recognize I'm a parent, but then also recognize that they want it, facilitate it. You know, hey, you want that? You can go get it. You know, if my son says, you know, actually my son just recently, he asked me, he said, hey dad, I want to develop some more skill. Can I get a private trainer? He asked me for that. And that's a very privileged thing, right? But I have the means to do that. So I said, yeah, no, I can get you that. And I can teach him anything that private trainer can teach him, right? But he's asking me, can you facilitate for me this thing I'm starting to desire? He's 10 and a half and there's something emerging in him and I can see it. He's like, I think I want that.
Yeah.
I think I want to go get it. So what I'm doing is going, okay, I'm going to facilitate this for you. So if he says, hey, can I do this thing? I'm going to say, yeah. And I'm going to find any means I can of getting that for him. Now, if you don't have those kinds of means, offer incentives, just little incentives. Once they're 14, 15, 16, hey, bud, you want that thing? Yeah. You want to get it? I'm going to do everything I can to facilitate that for you. And I'll even toss in a little incentive, you know? So like at 14, he probably won't like Nerf guns anymore.
Yeah.
But he might like baseball cards, you know?
Yep. For parents who feel that pressure to get that private trainer at 6, 7, 8 years old,
Yeah.
what would you say to that parent and how would you encourage them to reframe that thought process?
Yeah, I would say do anything you can to please remove that. It's not a healthy thing for them. They don't need more feedback with more feedback connected to more performance. It's just not what they need. If you want them to get touches, thrust it into the arena of play. If you want them to get time hitting a ball, put it in the backyard on a tee and get out there and laugh your butt off with them and just make up games, right? What we want to do and more is remove that as much as we possibly. And I'll use a story to illustrate this with my own life again. When my son was 7 years old and we watched a lot of soccer. So one day he said, Dad, will you teach me how to play soccer? I said, I don't know, but I don't know if you want me to teach you how to play soccer. You know, you might not like that because I'm your dad, not your coach. He goes, no, you can teach me. And I can. But he's like, and I knew what was happening here. I knew that he was like, I can get some love from dad here because we love soccer. So we go out to the field. We get out there and I said, well, what do you want me to teach you? And he said, well, the most important stuff. And I said, he's 7. And I said, well, that's passing and receiving the ball. Passing the ball, receiving the ball. I said, so go stand over there. I said, okay, so him hit the ball to me. And he did it. And he did it in this really goofy way with his toe. And I said, okay, so let's start with that. I go, but so what you want to do is you want to plant this foot next to the ball. We're going to call that your target foot. And then you want to open up that other foot. We're going to hit with the inside of your foot. And then his immediate response was, I like doing it that way. And now I could have easily said, well, you asked me to come out here and teach you. And I'm telling you that's the right thing. But my stance immediately was, of course you do. I said, you just want to play? And he goes, yeah, let's play. And then we ended up playing this weird, goofy game where it's like he gave me red cards and I had to freeze while he kicked the ball at my leg. And the whole time he's getting touches, right? And it was this goofy thing. And I think we ended up just wrestling. I don't know what happened. It was just this goofy, laughing thing. And he probably got 30 minutes of touches just running around the field. And it was there. But immediately he showed me, no, I'm still in this place of play. Right. And so for me to nurture that as much as I can, remove my ego, remove my own stuff and nurture that as much as I can is creating a foundation for, I can see it. It's coming in a couple of years when he's 12, 13. I can see it. There's this thing where he's going to go, you're going to see this, he's going to start to salivate at the idea of just going and getting it. And that's what I want to nurture in him. So when he's like, I'm ready to go, it'll be a healthy expression too. It'll be that kind of kid that can take down an opponent or be taken down and shake his hand with a smile afterwards. And that's really what we want to nurture.
At whatever level your kids participate in youth sports, you and your kids will benefit greatly from the resources 3A Athletics has carefully created to protect the foundation of your child's identity and your relationship. At the same time, these resources can help you unlock your child's true potential in sports and in life. The sooner you get started, the more successful your kid can be. Resources like Hero, an interactive guidebook taking parents of young athletes on a journey through their own experiences and perspectives, and how to approach the balance between being a loving parent and encouraging your child to push through challenges and excel in their endeavors. 3A Athletics. Awareness, activation, achievement. From good to great. See us at 3athletics.com.
All right. What would you give as an example of the antelope mindset in the space of youth sports?
Yeah. Well, again, when we're talking little ones, they're all antelopes, right? They're all antelopes. But once we get into, you observe them in the older years, 13, 14, 15, 16. If you watch any sport, it's the ones that struggle. They're reacting and not acting. They tend to do the minimum. They tend to do the minimum in sports. I think there's a lot of athletes where I had a great example of a kid that I'm working with the other day, and he says he's a 14-year-old soccer player, and he says, I want to be he told me, I want to be a college soccer player, maybe pro. And he was eating pizza, drinking a Coke while he was talking to me on Zoom. And he does the minimum. He doesn't train on his own. He doesn't go after it. That's classic kind of antelope behavior where there's a conscious narrative, I want to be awesome, but the unconscious, which you can clearly observe, is actually, no, I want to feel safe and do what feels good to me, right? And so you can easily observe those on the field. When I work with a lot of professional athletes, I start watching their film, and especially this is easy to observe in soccer. It's easy in baseball too, but I have more trained soccer eye, than baseball. But you'll see a guy out there, and the movements he's doing, especially off the ball, you watch him off the ball, his movements are reactive and unconscious. So there's not that consciously active. You watch a guy like Lionel Messi, okay, obviously the greatest example of a lion in our generation. You watch him, he's out there, his head's on a swivel. Every single step he takes, and a lot of it's walking, which is funny, is intentional. Every step. He's analyzing constantly where I need to be to exploit that guy. He's observing his opponents. I mean, you can see him looking at which side that center back is leaning to know which side to take him, right? It's a fascinating thing. It's just a conscious, that's where it is. You see conscious mindsets. And some people will try to project on like a guy like a Kobe Bryant or a Michael Jordan as they were create examples of lions, but they actually aren't. They aren't. They're those rare examples of antelopes that could put on lion skin and have fangs. And you can always tell because if you look at the personal lives of athletes, and you talk about the struggles, the anxieties, the frustrations, the mental health struggles. People talk about the Mamba mentality with Kobe as if that was the true killer. But what it was is, and when you start to listen to his interviews and you start to listen to him talk, especially after he got older and he started doing therapy and he retired, he was talking about, no, the whole time I was running from something, right? So you can be a great player. There are very rare examples of great players that aren't lions. But, a lion tends to be much, they run because they're hungry, but when it's not time to play, when they're not on the field, there tends to be a balance to the way they live their lives.
Yeah, and I think back to the story I shared before about getting sent down and how that triggered that antelope mindset, or at least brought it like to the forefront for me, where I had convinced myself from 9 to 21 that I was a lion, that I had this hunger and this desire to be the greatest baseball player to ever live. Yeah. And that was a genuine dream that I thought I had, right? And as we talk about later, the difference between a dream or a fantasy and a goal. I think it's important for parents to understand when your kid is in the developmental years, we're not talking about raising lions, right? Yeah, we're talking about supporting and creating space, unconditional love for your child to work through their own process. Yeah. When they get to those adolescent years, then being able to help them understand how to support that mindset of being a lion versus an antelope. Yeah. And for me, when I was stuck in that antelope stage or mindset, really for the remainder of my career, at least it now became my operating system. Yeah. It was so difficult for me to find that desire, that hunger, because I was scared, because I was being chased by the thought of, if you don't perform, you're going to get sent down. Yeah. Or you're going to get cut from the premier team and you're going to have to go play for the B team or whatever it is in the youth sports world that we're talking about. Right. So for parents to understand when their child is stuck in that antelope mindset, how would you encourage them to approach their child and help them work through that process? Yeah.
Well, again, and understanding that in their developmental years, right, if they're young and a child's an antelope, that's normal. Yep. Treat them like one. Don't try to make them into a lion, right? That's the idea. We don't want them out. We want them, and you could say, let's say lion cub instead. Lion cubs are same, just like antelope babies, right? They just need to know they're safe and loved. You don't see lion cubs doing the hunting, right? They're the ones just being safe back in the den, waiting for mom to get home, right? And so the idea is to treat them like that. As they get older, if you want to nurture that within them, you still focus on watching, experiencing where do they need that love and safety, and where do they need that incentive and that challenge, and where do they need me to facilitate? Because you'll see at times they want to kill. How do I facilitate that well? How do I do that without violating that boundary of parent versus coach? Because them asking me to facilitate them becoming that isn't necessarily asking me to coach them, right? I mean, I know even when my kids 14, 15, 16, they're not going to be sitting there asking me to teach them all the time how to play the game. If they do, I can offer that. But it's still about recognizing that even deep inside them, every kid, no matter how much, even the Kobe Bryants and the Michael Jordans of the world still need to know where home was. They still needed to know where safety was. They still needed to know where that love was. And so our job as parents specifically, is to continue to be that. And we shift from being that very nurturing thing to something that more looks like a lighthouse, a lighthouse that just stands on the hill and shines, always kind of showing you the way home. That's the goal as they get older, right? There's that love, there's that safety, there's that understanding, but there's also that connection that says I can facilitate whatever you want to learn, whatever you want to do, but we give them ownership of it. What do you want? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's a great time to reference the book Hero once again, because giving parents the foundational understanding and awareness, giving them tools to not only work through on their own process, but in how they communicate and relate and create space with their kids, and then how they interact and communicate with coaches, I think are three of the foundational pieces, right, that you wrote in that book.
Yeah.
I'm also very excited, right, because we've developed this athlete's journal for kids to go through these monthly teachings, one of which is the lion and the antelope mindset, and teaching kids the difference between the two mindsets, right, but encouraging them and teaching them how to face the antelope with the courage of a lion. How would you encourage parents to formulate a thought around how to support their kids in that process and become more aware of some of the triggers, right? The parents consciously and subconsciously are projecting onto their kids and how their kids respond to that.
Yeah. Well, and that's again about when they're helping their kids understand those kinds of things. It's about addressing the underlying emotions. Like, how are you feeling? Well, I'm mad about the game. Yeah. I go, well, how's that feel in your body? It's always helping them work through the levels. And while we do it too, Hero is designed to create that process. And that's why it's so important. Because even if someone's listening to this right now, this is good teaching, right? This is really good teaching, and that's really, really helpful. And you might want to share it and show your friends. And we do this with social media. We send this stuff around. Hey, check out this awesome teaching. But teaching doesn't change us.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It impacts us, and it plants different kinds of seeds, but process changes us. And so the process that Hero brings parents through is to make them deeply aware of those kind of things. When you develop that awareness, then you gain the ability to help someone else do it. And you cannot take your kids somewhere you haven't gone yourself. And I cannot stress that enough. So the player journal is actually designed to help kids begin to develop that awareness within themselves. But if that kid's going through the player journal and the parent has no awareness, it's going to have a minimal effect. It really is. We have to build, families are a foundational concept. The kids will build on what their parents have built within themselves. That's why, the best dad I've ever seen was a mentor of mine. He's an incredible father. And I asked him what the key is. And he said, deal with your stuff, man. He used a different word, but he said, deal with your stuff. So by any means necessary, you deal with that. If you deal with that, they will find their way. Those are his exact words. And so he's saying, you're the foundation, let them build it. So Hero is designed to create that awareness within people.
So as we're getting ready to transition into our next episode, we talk a lot about triggers. What are some of the triggers that parents can be aware of that they themselves are creating within their child? And maybe talk a little bit about the coaches as well, because parents being the number one, coaches being basically 1B, right, to the child's experience. So how would you encourage parents to become more aware of those triggers?
Yeah. Well, the word trigger, we'll get into this more, but the word trigger refers to how things that are repressed in the unconscious show up in the conscious world. So most of the time we're talking about hyper emotional experiences. So in sports, of course, it's the umpire, it's the referee, it's the coach not playing my kid, it's that kid fouling my kid, it's that other parent. It's these kinds of things tend to create these spikes in experience, and that's what triggers are. Triggers are spikes where unconscious trauma, unconscious unmet needs show up, right? And that is everywhere in youth sports. So we need to create the awareness of what triggers us in order to be able to address some of those things that are down there.
And a couple of things that parents can take away from this: cheering for your kids from the sidelines. We've talked a little bit about that in the past. I love how in Hero we give parents the tools, right, to approach that conversation with your child and actually ask them how it feels when you cheer. Or I think more obvious example would be coaching from the sidelines. We've talked a little bit about too. I think it's incredibly important for parents to understand how triggering of an experience that can be for a child, and how most parents are consciously thinking, I'm going to help my kid by telling him to swing the bat or to throw strikes or to be on the attack and not on the defense. But for parents to really differentiate what that is actually doing, right, versus what they think it's doing. And I think that's one of the hardest challenges parents face on the sidelines. Is we talked about before, we still experience this, having the level of knowledge and experience and understanding that we do.
Absolutely.
It doesn't make it go away, right? But it's allowing parents to create that bottom of the iceberg coming above the water and say, I know that's going to happen to me, right? So for parents, again, being able to go into a game setting or a match or whatever sport it is, prepare yourself for that moment. Take 5 minutes in the car while your kid's out there warming up or whatever it may be before you get in the car, and go through a 5-minute just breathing, thinking, feeling, energy. Where is it at? So that when you walk into that space, you are approaching the whole experience with a completely different energy around you. And I know from my own experience, I know we've talked about this at length, when your kid feels that energy, that unconditional love, right? That, hey, dad's not projecting or mom's not projecting these anxieties on me, and then they can go out there and experience it for themselves.
Right. Yeah. And then whatever happens, and they just continue to develop that relationship of, I guess I'm safe here. Yeah, I'm safe here. It's okay, and I can keep trying. I want to kind of finish. There's a quote, very famous, one of the fathers of modern psychology, a guy named Carl Jung. He said, if we don't do the work of making what is unconscious conscious, it'll dictate your life and you'll call it fate. And that's the work you're talking about, is pulling that iceberg up out of the water. And if we can't do it in ourselves, then we can't ask our kids to do it. Yeah,
and I think as we dive into triggers in our next episode, right, we're going to realize that our children, our spouses, and the other human beings around us are there to teach us something, right? And the more that we can become aware, the more that we can do the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
At whatever level your kids participate in youth sports, you and your kids will benefit greatly from the resources 3A Athletics has carefully created to protect the foundation of your child's identity and your relationship. At the same time, these resources can help you unlock your child's true potential in sports and in life. The sooner you get started, the more successful your kid can be. Resources like Hero, an interactive guidebook taking parents of young athletes on a journey through their own experiences and perspectives, and how to approach the balance between being a loving parent and encouraging your child to push through challenges and excel in their endeavors. 3A Athletics. Awareness, activation, achievement. From good to great. See us at 3athletics.com.